Good morning, everybody. Pleasingly, New South Wales has satisfied another important hurdle. There were 1,480 cases of community transmission, 70% double dose, 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 70% double dose. We had a target of 10 million jabs. We're over a third of the way there. We need to get to that 10 million for us to have a sense of real freedom, because if there's doses in Australia, please give them to us in New South Wales. The quicker we get to 10 million, the freer we will all live, no matter what the case numbers are. We'll get to that 10 million quick fast, and then ironically we'll be the first state to have more freedoms. Jabs in arms. We're now leading the nation, and we want to obviously continue that. I'm pleased to show other states how that's possible.
I'm going to try something new.
I'm going to try something new. Testing.
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 Okay, this will do. There has been a suspicion that New South Wales were receiving more doses of the Pfizer vaccine for a little while now. Some of it had been publicly announced, so could be easily explained. 50,000 doses here, 90,000 weekly doses there, the Poland windfall. But even accounting for all of that, there was still a huge discrepancy in the number of Commonwealth-administered doses in New South Wales compared to other states. I posted a video on the 2nd of September to try and highlight a simple fact. The states can only administer the doses of the vaccine that they are given. If states are fully utilising their supply, the only way they can administer more doses is if they are supplied more. If a state is fully utilising their supply, then it is not fair to blame them for falling behind in the vaccination race. The huge difference in the number of Commonwealth doses administered in New South Wales really stood out to me. A couple of days later, curiosity got the better of me, and after seeing Casey, the ABC data guy, post a few graphs like this one on Twitter, I decided to put the question out there. While Casey didn't respond, a few other people did, pointing to differences in the number of approved GPs and pharmacies. Then on Monday, Laura Tingle from the ABC's 7:30 report blew the lid off the vaccine Hunger Games.
The Hunger Games.
The extent to which vaccines have been concentrated on New South Wales at the cost of other states may come as a surprise. Back in late June, as Sydney's current outbreak was just taking off, New South Wales was receiving 32% of the national Pfizer allocation through primary care, mostly GPs. That's roughly in line with New South Wales' proportion of the national population. But by last month, its allocation had jumped to 45%. Some of that was thanks to extra vaccines, like the delivery from Poland, which mostly went to New South Wales. But that's not the whole story, and these figures illustrate the extent to which the New South Wales doses have come at the expense of other states. Consider Victoria, Queensland and Western Australia, which have all seen their allocations fall well below their share of the national population.
Now, I want to make a couple of comments in relation to some reporting last night in relation to vaccines and Victoria's fair share. I signed up to a national plan to vaccinate our nation, not a national plan to vaccinate Sydney. We have seen hundreds of thousands of vaccines that should have come and should now be in the arms of Victorians going into Sydney, into GP practices and into New South Wales. Now, I have been very clear all along the way. Some extra allocations, well, we don't begrudge that. Sydney are in a very difficult set of circumstances. But they were known. They were announced. This was not announced. This was done without anyone knowing. And the Commonwealth have got caught doing it. So it needs to stop. That's the first thing. And secondly, there needs to be a make good. There needs to be a reckoning where additional doses come to Victoria. I'll leave the Premiers of Queensland and West Australia to speak for what they think should happen.
But it's now time for a catch-up. And the states that provided that additional support to New South Wales now need to be given our catch-up supplies.
Yes, we understand that when a state is going through a particular troublesome time, that yes, more vaccines should be allocated. But don't go then and blame Queensland and Western Australia for getting out the vaccine that we have available. You know, it all depends on the supply. If we get the supply, we can get into people's arms.
It's also incredible to see the nerve of Greg Hunt to be out there criticising Queenslanders, calling us laggards, when he knows full well how many vaccines he's taking from Queensland to give to New South Wales, and he knows full well that we are fully utilising our allocation. If we had those vaccines, then we would be higher up the league table that he and the Prime Minister and others point to, but more importantly, more Queenslanders would be protected.
There's something like 340,000 doses that have not come to Victoria that ought to have. That would mean we were closer to 70%. It would mean we were closer to 80%. It would mean we were closer to ending these lockdowns. I did not sign up, and no Victorian signed up, to a national plan to vaccinate Sydney. Federal ministers who it seems have nothing else to do but ring journalists and background about how apparently Victoria is not vaccinating enough people fast enough.
So what about the difference in the number of Commonwealth-delivered jabs?
It is in the federal government-run distribution of Pfizer through the GP network, and now other primary care providers like pharmacies, where there have been huge shifts in supply in favour of New South Wales. Based on these numbers, for example, it appears Victoria may have missed out on up to 343,000 Pfizer jabs between June and September, Queensland 100,000 jabs, and Western Australia 114,000 jabs.
General Fruin has confirmed this. He is running it, and he has confirmed that they had extra points of presence, as they call them, and it wasn't like, well, here's the national pool, you're going to have more points of presence, but you have to share your share amongst a greater number of spots. No, each and every one of the increased spots were fully allocated. Fully allocated. They received well more than a population share, and the Polish doses do not get led down that alleyway. The Polish doses do not account for this. I'm not quibbling about the Polish doses. Approving a whole heap of extra GPs when you didn't do that here, and then providing all of those GPs with additional allocations. That just means there's more places to get vaccinated in Sydney, more vaccine in Sydney, and more people who have been vaccinated in Sydney. Our state hubs are doing an amazing job. Those GPs that are accredited and have got supply, they're doing a great job too. Only problem is there's a lot more of them been accredited and fully supplied in Sydney at the expense of everybody else. That's just not fair, and I would not be doing my job if I didn't call that out. These were not announced. This is the outcome of decisions that have been made, but they were not announced.
Those redirected vaccines are coming from the Commonwealth's share of the task of vaccinating Queenslanders. So you'll have heard the Premier say before that the Commonwealth committed to do 70% of the rollout and the state committed to do 30%. Well, now we are doing roughly 40% of the rollout and the Commonwealth is doing closer to 60%. That's because of those reallocated vaccines and because Queensland Health is stepping up to do more than we committed to at the beginning of the rollout.
I would just make the point that I think when we first signed up to this, we were due to do about 25% of the work. We're doing about 50% of the work.
But more troubling is the apparent extra weighting of future Pfizer allocations to New South Wales for the remainder of the year. For example, Victoria would normally get around 82% of New South Wales's allocation, but it is forecast to get between just 66% and 69%.
The Commonwealth's own Horizon reports suggest we'll continue to get less than our fair share of the vaccines through September and through to the end of the year. These reallocations can't all be explained by the outbreak. If it was just because of the outbreak, then why would they be taking vaccines off Victoria as well to send to New South Wales? All we're asking for here is some honesty, to stop criticising Queensland and Queenslanders for our vaccination rate, which is largely caused by the flow of vaccines into the state.
New South Wales are getting a lot more vaccines because of the situation we're in. Where does that leave the national plan? If when we hit 70 and 80%, are we just going to push on by ourselves?
Look, as we've said, when we get to 70% in New South Wales, there's no doubt people will experience many more freedoms, much more freedoms than what we're experiencing today. However, I don't anticipate internal borders to come down until the nation reaches those targets. So it's likely that New South Wales will reach those 70% and 80% double dose vaccinations ahead of other states, and that's understandable because we have a current outbreak and we've really been pushing our vaccination. So I don't anticipate internal borders to change at that stage. The national plan says that the nation has to reach those targets, but what it does mean that internally we all live much more freely than what we otherwise would.
Premier, you say that we're 2 weeks ahead of the rest of the country in terms of vaccinations. One of the reasons for that, of course, is because we've been given extra vaccines. A lot of the premiers interstate are upset about that. Federal government says it's going to make amends on the numbers and distribution. What's it going to mean to us if they do start slowing down supply to New South Wales? And is it fair? And should we have to give back doses to the rest of the country?
Well, firstly, I remember being highly criticised for suggesting that, along with Dr. Chant, of course, that vaccination was the way out of this outbreak and we had to live with COVID. So we made a very hearty effort in New South Wales early on, even before the Delta outbreak, to vaccinate as much of our population as possible, as early as possible. We had 100 sites already set up across the state. The GP network we've been working with. Other states don't have as strong a GP network as we do, and I really want to thank the GPs who've been consistently working with us. They've been delivering a lot of the vaccine and they'll continue to do more. The pharmacists who came online. So we've had a strategy for some months about vaccinating our population as quickly as possible. And certainly, it didn't take long within the first few days of the Delta outbreak for us to know, once we'd been in lockdown, that this was different to anything we'd experienced. We had to learn to live with it, and that vaccine was the only way out. Other states obviously haven't had to go through what we have, and they're obviously in a bit of catch-up mode, but I would suggest it's because of the risk and the outbreak that New South Wales has faced that we've appreciated that our best way to protect life and not to lose thousands of lives and hundreds of lives every month is to make sure we provide vaccine. And we've also been pushing both vaccines. We have a high increasing take-up of both vaccines. AstraZeneca is in ample supply. And we say to anybody, if you're worried about taking that vaccine, go speak to your GP and make sure you're aware of what your concerns are. But on the main, we've just said whatever vaccine is available, assess your own health risks and get vaccinated. And the people of the state have rolled up their sleeves and done so. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his support during the entire course of the pandemic, but especially in relation to this outbreak. Those extra doses of Pfizer that he was able to give to New South Wales are making a real difference.
There is no doubt that both the additional announced and unannounced doses of Pfizer has gone a long way toward giving New South Wales the lead in the vaccination race. However, it seems apparent that this lead has come at the expense of other states, and that needs to be acknowledged.
Now, some don't like to see this as a race, but a race it surely is. What I didn't know was that Premier Berejiklian's in a sprint while the rest of us are supposed to do some sort of egg and spoon thing. No, we want our fair share. These allocations, which are totally unfair and were under the table, need to stop, and we need to get a make good. We need to get those doses that we didn't get fast-tracked to us. That's as constructive as I can be.
If you have not seen the full story on the 7:30 report, then please, do yourself a favour, go and watch the whole thing. The link is in the description.